Hey guys, it's Madison Estes. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing every horror movie that I saw in 2023. The first horror movie I saw this year is called Sick. It is about a girl and her friend that decide to go to this really nice, out-of-the-way, secluded place in order to quarantine during the pandemic. About 30 minutes into the movie, it becomes a home invasion film, and then about 30 minutes later, it kind of morphs into something slightly different. I don't really want to give any spoilers away in case you haven't seen it, because I do think that it's worth watching at least once. They did something different with the third act that I haven't seen before in terms of character-villain motivation. You think that it might just be a random home invasion, but it turns out there is more to it. I did like this film a lot. I have a little bit of mixed feelings regarding the third act. I appreciate that it was something new and different that we haven't seen before, but some of the acting was a little bit corny in the third act, I have to admit that. And you know, at the end of the day, it's pretty much just a home invasion film, but it is a really good one. So I give Sick 3 out of 5 stars. Next up is the James Wan film Megan. Now, whenever I saw the trailer for this, including the doll doing the little dance that went viral on TikTok, I thought this is going to be terrible. I just kept remembering Dead Silence, which is not a horror film by Mr. James Wan that I'm a fan of, and I was like, this is just going to be Dead Silence Part 2. This is going to be ridiculous. But I was actually pleasantly surprised. This movie is about a woman that ends up having to take in her niece after her sister and husband die, and she starts trying to bond with her and develop a really close relationship, but obviously the niece is really shut off emotionally because her parents just died and she's traumatized. This woman also works for a robotics/toy company that wants to design toys that are like perfect companions for children that educate them but also teach them social things and essentially kind of take over the role of a parent. That's whenever this movie starts turning into a Black Mirror episode, and that's whenever this movie is at its best, is whenever it's showing how technology is starting to take over things that parents are supposed to be doing. This movie is rated PG-13, so it never gets too gory or graphic, although the doll does do some pretty horrible things in the name of protecting the little girl, including harming some innocent people and animals. Overall, I think this was a really solid horror film. I really liked the relationship that developed between the aunt and the niece. I think that it had a really good plot. I thought it was a good commentary on technology and parenting. If there's anything I would change about this is I would have made it a little bit gorier, and I maybe would have raised the stakes a little bit sooner, but overall this was a solid film. I give Megan 4 out of 5 stars. Next up is Snowfalls. I really wanted to like this film so much. It was supposed to come out in 2019, and then it got delayed several times, and at one point I thought the film wasn't going to be released at all. I thought maybe they didn't have enough funding or something had gone wrong, but yeah, something did go wrong. Maybe not in pre-production or post-production, but something definitely went wrong with this film. So this film is supposed to be about a group of people that end up trapped in a remote cabin, and they believe that the snow surrounding them is contaminated or somehow evil. That is what the description says on IMDb, and I was fascinated by the idea of sentient snow, or the idea of there being some kind of, contamination in the snow that starts making them go crazy or making them sick. Unfortunately, that's not really the film that we got. The characters do all start going crazy, but it appears to be caused by sleep deprivation because the doctor character, who's supposed to be a smarty pants, tells all of the characters that they shouldn't fall asleep because they might die of hypothermia. Yes, that is true, but they had all kinds of things inside of the cabin that they could have burned in order to stay warm so they didn't have to be sleep deprived and end up doing stupid things that got themselves killed. Also, this isn't supposed to be a movie about sleep deprivation. It's supposed to be a movie about contaminated or evil snow, and that is a premise that was not delivered in this film. Okay, the characters went crazy and did stupid things because they were sleep deprived, not because the snow was affecting them in any way. So yeah, I did a whole review on this movie, so I'm not going to waste any more time talking about it, but I was disappointed. There's 1 or 2 kind of cool scenes in this movie, but it is not worth wasting your time on. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. But as bad as that movie was, it was a masterpiece compared to the movie that I'm about to talk about now. A movie that I don't even consider to be a movie, and that movie is Skinamarink. So this movie is supposed to be about 2 boys in a house that wake up in the middle of the night and they can't find their father, and then all the doors and windows in their house start disappearing, which sounds cool as hell, especially like for a surrealist film, but that's not what this was. This was a movie that was like a 2-minute close-up on a door for no reason other than, I guess, to say fuck you to your audience. And it was like a 1-minute close-up on a window and a ceiling. Like, for some reason, the camera pans up to the ceiling and it just sits there for 30 seconds. And now we're gonna look at this wall. I don't think I've ever seen I don't even want to call it a film because I feel like you have to have a story, and the story that was posted on IMDb, there is nothing in this movie that even hints at that, except at one point you see like the back of a little boy's head, and that's it. Like, you don't even see the characters in this film. I'm not exaggerating or joking when I say that this film has close-ups of doors and windows and ceilings, and just it looks like a drunk person wandering through an empty house that's going to be posted on Zillow or something. Like, it does not feel like a movie. I would say that this is like an audio-visual experience, but even in terms of like, you know, an audio-visual, you know, Oculus experience or an ASMR, other things that I think this is more similar to, it's not even a good one. Like, it's very slow and boring, and the like filter that they put on it is terrible. Like, it's so cheesy and shitty, and it looks I mean, it looks bad. I think it's supposed to be intentionally bad, but it just looks bad too. It's just awful. It's really awful. It might actually be the worst thing I've ever seen, like, in terms of just poor quality. So this is the only thing I've ever given 0 stars in my life, but I give this 0 stars. Skinamarink gets 0 stars. Moving on. Cocaine Bear! I was fully prepared for Cocaine Bear to be the worst movie of 2023, and I was wrong. This movie was so fun. You've got a big bear doing a line of cocaine on a woman's severed leg. You've got, rest in peace, Ray Liotta arguing with a detective, threatening his little dog and then saying, I don't want to kill the dog, but I will if I have to. And he's supposed to be like this mega mob boss, and it's so funny. I feel like I'm not explaining it well enough, but it's one of the funniest horror films I saw this year. And, you know, the plot is very simple. It's a bear that finds a drug dealer's cocaine stash. The plane went down and the bear found all the drugs. The bear gets high and kills people. That's the whole story. There's also, you know, a mother trying to find her children, and there's, you know, the detective trying to find the drugs, and the drug lord's trying to find the drugs. Everybody's just trying to find drugs in this film. It's a very simple plot, but it's a very fun time. I give Cocaine Bear 3 out of 5 stars. Next up is Knock at the Cabin. I did a whole video on this movie if you want to know my in-depth thoughts on all the problems, but the main thing is that the ending that they added that's different from the book, it really undoes the entire message of the book and honestly of the movie up until that point. It really makes it seem as if, you know, religious zealots that are homophobic and that spew hateful messages are in the right. And also I feel like it just takes away all of the mystery and all of the things that are so good about the book. That was really my main problem, but I think even if I hadn't read the book, I would have felt like the ending was really cheesy and not necessary. I'm not saying they needed to keep the ending ambiguous like the book, but I do think the ending that they chose did not serve the story well, and that the message got muddled and maybe even ruined in doing so. So I give Knock at the Cabin 2 out of 5 stars. Moving on to Infinity Pool. This movie is about a rich guy that accidentally kills someone, but he's able to hire a clone to stand in his place and accept the punishment for his crime. So I thought this was a really interesting premise, but unfortunately I think the execution was absolutely terrible. For one thing, this movie starts off with him being a completely unlikable piece of shit who's cheating on his wife. And then there's also all these really gratuitous shots, like Mia Goth is jerking him off and he comes, and like apparently he comes on the ground and there's a close-up of that, and I'm like, why? Why do we need that other than, I guess, to get people talking about this movie? Because I can think of no reason for it. I'm not a prude, by the way. Like, I think sex in horror movies is great, especially if, you know, it's symbolic or if it's just that type of movie. I don't know. And there's also lots of films that manage to blend the two very well. But this one is not one of those films, and I don't know about you, but Come on the Ground doesn't do anything for me. It's not sexual. It's also, I'm like, does it mean something? Is it supposed to be symbolic? His seed is wasted on the ground, but I'm like, this movie isn't about babies or men sowing their seeds or anything like that. It's about rich privilege. So I just have to think, you know, that this scene is literally just like gratuitous shock value. And it seems like there's a lot of scenes like that in this movie. Like there's a golden shower scene where they're pissing on one of the clones, I guess to torture him, which I don't know why that was necessary either. I think what I really wanted was just like a really nuanced take on, you know, rich privilege, about a guy who maybe starts off decent, but whenever you start removing the consequences for one's actions, he just becomes more and more depraved. I think that's what the filmmaker was going for. I just think that it wasn't executed well at all. And if that was the message, it got lost, because it just seems like a guy that's a piece of shit from day one, just getting slightly worse because he's on a power trip. And then like the tables kind of turn, but then they don't. That's another thing too. I feel like commit to something. Either he gets away with everything and there's no punishment, or, you know, he doesn't. And I don't know, I just wanted some kind of satisfying resolution considering all the crap I had to watch to get to the end of the film, and there was nothing satisfying about this film. I give Infinity Pool 1 out of 5 stars. Okay, technically this isn't a movie. I included a few shows on this list as well. I apologize, I didn't realize that until just now. So the first mini-series I want to talk about is The Last of Us. It is your standard apocalypse scenario about a grown man having to protect a child. It is a trope that comes up over and over again in apocalyptic fiction, but this was just executed really well. Also, the child isn't his daughter. She is the cure to the virus that is killing everyone, or they think she might have the cure. So he has to take her to scientists that just happen to be like all the way across the country, so that they can find a cure and hopefully save all of humanity. So none of these ideas are super unique, but you know, the main draw is the relationship that develops between the man who's protecting this girl and the girl that may be the key to saving humanity. You know, they're both very closed off and they're very traumatized by all the things that they've been through, but you know, they slowly start to develop a really sweet father-daughter relationship. And the ending is very satisfying in my opinion. It's a little bit controversial, but I thought it was super satisfying and I loved it, and I give The Last of Us 5 out of 5 stars. Next up is Evil Dead Rise. When this first came out, we had not had a good horror movie since Megan, which had been almost like 5 months. It was a dry spell, okay? So I think I originally gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Again, I think a part of that was just that I hadn't seen any good horror movies. The Last of Us was like the only good horror content I had seen in 5 months, okay? So I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Looking back at it now, I think it's more of a 4 out of 5 star movie. I think that 5 out of 5 is a little bit too generous for a story that has almost no plot. This is just your standard possession story. The kids find a book, they open it, mommy gets possessed, and then the aunt has to try to save them from the evil mommy. That's really the whole story, pretty much. They're in an apartment. That's different, because usually Evil Dead movies are like set in the woods. So yeah, that's different. I don't have that much else to say about this, because like I said, the plot's very simple. It's very creepy. The mother being possessed and the creepy voice that she uses and all that probably gave me nightmares. I also saw this at the drive-in, which made this like 10 times scarier. It's just a very frightening movie. I think, you know, if you are capable of being scared by horror films and you see this one in the dark, all alone, it'll probably scare you if you're capable of being afraid of horror movies. Yeah, so I give this film 4 out of 5 stars. Next up is the horror comedy film Renfield. This movie is about Dracula's assistant. He is trying to break away from Dracula because of the toxic work environment. So he joins a support group for people that are trying to recover from narcissists, and the support group doesn't understand that he's dealing with a literal monster, which leads to some very hilarious moments. I don't think that this is a very effective horror film. There's definitely a few gory shots, but this is definitely a lot more action comedy. However, it was marketed as a horror film. It has tons of horror tropes. It's about Dracula, so I felt like, you know, it needed to be mentioned. I think this is a super funny film. I think that it does everything that it sets out to do. I think that it's a very effective horror comedy or action comedy. It was just a really enjoyable movie. I give it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is Scream 6. I was not a fan of the previous Scream film. It was the first time ever that I didn't like a Scream movie. I thought that it was really kind of Mary Sue-ish, how Sam just happened to be Billy Loomis's daughter, and all of the things that happened at the climax revolving around that and everything that happened. I just was not a fan of that movie. This one I feel redeemed it in a lot of ways. For one thing, I feel like there was actually a little bit less emphasis on Sam and a little bit more on the sister dynamic, which was really compelling to me. I enjoyed that a lot. There was also a little bit more focus on the friendships as well. They really kind of humanized all of the characters. And I feel like focusing more on a smaller group of characters definitely made me feel more attached to these characters. And I cared about whether or not they lived or died, which is kind of important in a horror movie. I also really liked that this was set in New York, which was not something that I was initially on board with. Whenever I saw the promotional materials and saw it's Scream in New York, I was like, oh my god, this is just like Jason Takes Manhattan, it's gonna be terrible. But I was pleasantly surprised. One of my favorite scenes in this movie is whenever Sam and her sister are hiding from Ghostface in a convenience store. And it feels like, you know, a gas station robbery scene, but it's not, obviously. They're hiding from a serial killer. But that's what it feels like. It's very intense and very scary, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think that the film was great. I liked the whodunit aspect. I guessed some of it, but not all of it, which I thought was really fun. This was just a really great film. I give Scream 6 4 out of 5 stars. Next up is the Hulu original horror film Clock. This movie is about a woman that does not want to have children. She's never had the urge to have children, but her partner wants kids, her dad gets on her about not having kids, her friends are all asking her, when are you going to have children? And she just feels a really strong societal pressure to have children and to want children. She hears about a treatment for women like her that will allow her to get in touch with her biological drive that will make her want to have children and be a mother. This movie definitely has some Handmaid's Tale vibes. It also seems though it's a little bit influenced by the Stepford Wives. I enjoyed this a lot. I thought it had some interesting twists. I really liked the premise. I'm also someone that really doesn't have that, you know, drive to need to have children. I think kids are great. I just don't feel as though I have to have them for my life to be fulfilled. So I really related with this character a lot. It kind of felt like she was joining a conversion camp. Like, we're going to change you to make you normal, or at least what our idea of normal is supposed to be. So I just thought that it was really unique and interesting and scary. It was scary because they come at you with those conversion camp vibes. Those, we know that, you know, this, you don't want to be this way, but we're going to help you. We're going to help you be normal. And it's just really scary, honestly. It was scary to me because it's like, oh God, I don't want someone to, you know, put me in this horrible environment and tell me they're going to fix me. I don't need to be fixed. So, which, you know, is the whole point of the movie, honestly. But it was really enjoyable. It was really fun. I think if you like Handmaid's Tale or anything along those lines, then you will definitely like this movie. I give Clock 4 out of 5 stars. Next up is another horror show, not movie, and that is Maniac, which is on Netflix at this time. Maniac is an anthology show. There are multiple stories in each episode. I'm not going to go over all of them. That would be super time consuming. My favorite story is called Toontown. It's about this pair of siblings that drive into this town where whenever people die, a tombstone erupts from their body. Well, they don't know that, and they accidentally hit someone with their car, and they put them in the back seat to try to take them to a hospital, but then they die, so they end up putting them in the trunk of their car, and then later on they find out about the tombstones. When they open the trunk, there's, you know, a tombstone erupting from this person's body, and they have to try to figure out how they're going to get rid of the body and not get caught, and some other really disturbing things happen, but it was a really good story. There's a lot of really haunting, creepy stories in this show, but there's definitely some misses for sure. There are some episodes that I was just like, what was the point of that? There were some that I think were supposed to be funny, but I guess maybe it's a cultural differences thing, or maybe I just didn't find it funny. I don't know. I liked the scary episodes though. Those are my favorite. And like I said, it's hit or miss, but the ones that hit are really great in my opinion. I give Maniac overall 4 out of 5 stars. Next up is Black Mirror Season 6. I did an entire video where I ranked each episode and the season as a whole, so I'm not going to get into it too much. I just want to say that Beyond the Sea is one of my favorite episodes of the entire series, and I've seen every episode, so that is saying quite a lot. I enjoyed it a lot. It's got Aaron Paul in it, and it's about 2 astronauts that go into space. One of the astronauts finds out that his entire family has been murdered, And they also, I should mention, they have robots on Earth that allow them to spend time on Earth and spend time with their family. His robot gets destroyed, so he starts taking over Aaron Paul's robot and spending time with his family. He starts getting a little too attached to the wife, and then, you know, there's a conflict between the two astronauts as they both kind of fight over the same woman. So it's a really fantastic episode with some very horrifying twists in it. I enjoyed it a lot. I gave the episode 5 out of 5 stars. And then the rest of the episodes this season were hit or miss. I think I gave the season overall 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is one of the biggest disappointments for me personally, and that is Insidious 5. This is a series that I have loved every single installment up until this film. Essentially, this movie is Dalton goes to college, which made me feel super old, by the way. And, you know, the father goes with him. They're trying to repair their relationship, which apparently has been broken at some point between the films. And then he, you know, ends up having these dreams, and we find out that he doesn't remember anything that happened in the previous movies, and neither does his son. Apparently, at some point, it was someone's brilliant idea to basically have the whole family hypnotized so they didn't remember the previous movies. And this entire movie, they're just trying to remember the things that happened in the first film. That's it. Has there ever been a series that's done this before? Has there ever been a series that was that desperate for a sequel that they're like, you know what we're gonna make a sequel where the characters are just trying to remember what happened in the other films. That's it, that's gonna be the whole movie. Because that is what happened in this film. And of course, the wife character is separated from the husband, and she's the one that tells him about, you know, the other world and, you know, the ghosts and the demons and the spirits and all that. And she basically tells him that he had his memory wiped, and so did their kid, and they thought that would be the best thing for all of them. So she actually knows the whole story, and she just doesn't tell him until, like, you know, right before Act 3. Yeah, so like she just kind of like doesn't tell them, I guess, because she doesn't know what's going on, and she doesn't know that the spirits and the bad things are back. But you know, whenever she finds out, then she tells the dad and everything comes out. And it's just, it feels like just such an unnecessary installment, and I just don't really have much else to say other than this is the most unnecessary sequel of all time. It's at least one of the most unnecessary sequels. Doesn't add anything to the greater story, and it also just wasn't entertaining in and of itself. I give Insidious 5 2 out of 5 stars because there's a couple of scenes that are kind of scary, but not really. So I'm being generous here. Insidious 5 gets 2 out of 5 stars. Alright, so this is my hot take, okay? Everyone gets one hot take for the year. This is my hot take. Talk to Me was not that good. It was everywhere. It was everywhere. The whole horror community was freaking out about this movie. So I went to see it. I kind of had mixed feelings because based on the trailer, I had no interest in seeing this movie. But I went into it with an open mind. I was like, maybe this movie is like a bait and switch. Maybe there's something totally different. It's not what I'm thinking it is. No, this movie is everything that I thought it was going to be. It was just as bad as I thought it was going to be. I won't say that it's horrible, like it didn't make my top 5 worst films of the year list, although that was a very competitive list this year. But I do think that it's just so overhyped. Oh man, I'm trying to think about all the reasons why I don't like it, and it's like, I'm not sure what there is to like here other than some of the acting. Some of the acting is good. Whenever the actors actually get to play characters that are believable and realistic and have emotions that normal people would feel, then the acting is great. So there's that element, but the storyline is really generic. There's also the fact that I cannot, for the life of me, believe or suspend my disbelief that a group of teenagers, there's not one square in that entire group that's going to be like, I can't handle this demon shit, like I gotta go. Or one person that's like tries to contact a priest or tries to get their parents involved or tries to get the police involved or something. Like one rational person. Especially whenever people start talking about how, well, you don't understand, Madison. This movie is a metaphor for drug addiction, so it doesn't have to make sense. I'm like, no, movies with subtext still have to make sense on the surface. Otherwise, they're deeply flawed films. Unless you're talking about something that's totally surreal, but this is not a surreal film. This is a film that has a very, you know, grounded story that just has characters that don't make logical decisions. And even if this is a story that's supposed to be about drug addiction, where, you know, the possession is the stand-in for getting high, again, you still usually have one character that is logical, that's like, hey, we shouldn't be doing this, hey, this is dangerous, hey, I care about my friends, I'm gonna go get help. And that also would have provided some much needed tension in the second act of this film, which really didn't go anywhere or do anything interesting. I needed a lot more. I needed some stakes, I needed tension, I needed characters in conflict with each other, and I didn't really see a whole lot of that. I know that the main character had her conflict with her dad and her internal conflict regarding her mother passing away and all her feelings regarding it, but that just wasn't enough for me. It just needed so much more, and I feel like there needed to be more external conflict, and the slow build did not have the payoff that I was expecting. The ending had a few moments that were kind of interesting, I guess, which is why I didn't give it 1 star, but this movie's just not for me. I didn't like any of these characters. I didn't believe their actions. I didn't like this film. I give Talk to Me 2 out of 5 stars. Oh, okay, now that that's out of the way, my hot take. Okay, that was my one hot take. Everybody gets their one, okay? Now we're on to a very popular opinion, which is The Pope's Exorcist, what a clusterfuck. It's really harder to think of things that were good in this film. The acting wasn't, the plot wasn't, there was not an original idea in this entire film. I didn't think any of it was executed very well. Yeah, there's nothing about this film that I like, and if you ask me to tell you what happened in this film, I'm like, a priest comes in whenever a little girl gets possessed, and things happen. I feel like I'm just giving you the plot of The Exorcist. But yeah, I don't know, people really talk shit about The Exorcist Believer, but at least that did a couple things that were different, even if I don't think it was successful. This didn't even really try to do anything different. There's just really nothing unique here at all. The acting's pretty subpar as well, but honestly, the screenplay doesn't really give them much to work with. I just think that this film was underwhelming in every way possible, and I'm not going to waste any more of your time or mine talking about this unworthy film. I give The Pope's Exorcism 1.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is Saw 10. This movie was so much better than I thought it was going to be. I was just blown away. I was very skeptical about this movie at the beginning of the year, if you remember. Because, you know, it's the 10th installment and I haven't really liked the last few Saw movies, really starting with 3Ds when the quality started to go down in my opinion, and then Spiral I just felt like it wasn't even a Saw movie, which was my biggest complaint about the film. This one not only feels like a Saw movie, it feels like old school Saw. It feels like back in the glory days of the Saw franchise when the website House of Jigsaw was active and there was like this whole Saw community that was very active and sharing memes and jokes, and it just felt like that period of time whenever the films were really at their best. And the film also did something really unique. It made John Kramer the protagonist. And John Kramer's always been an anti-hero, starting with really Saw 2 whenever he starts talking about wanting people to cherish their lives. And then in Saw 4, he really kind of becomes almost like a vigilante you're sort of rooting for because he's punishing bad people. Whereas, you know, a few movies before, he was testing doctors and photographers and just trying to make them cherish their lives. So he kind of went from villain to anti-hero to somewhat of a protagonist, or like a vigilante protagonist, and now finally, in Saw 10, he is just straight up protagonist. And the reason why is because he is testing people so horrible, so completely irredeemable that you cannot help but sympathize and root for John Kramer in this film. So in this film, John is sort of at the end of his rope. He has tried every single cancer treatment imaginable, and he's ready to try this really innovative thing that he heard about from a friend in a support group. And it turns out that that is a medical con. They are pretending to perform procedures and do blood work that shows that their cancer is gone, and they are conning people out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So John Kramer decides to test the person behind this con and all of her associates. It is a brilliant premise for this series, especially because it's very similar to what they've done before, but still different enough to be unique. And of course, it's personal because it personally affected John. This one really just had so many new things that were interesting, and I really loved how we got to see John and his accomplice and the relationship between those two that is hinted at in other films and that we see briefly in Saw 3, but you know, you really see that relationship in a lot more depth in this film, and it's something that I really enjoyed and that I hope we get to see in more Saw sequels. I give Saw 10 5 out of 5 stars. Next up is A Haunting in Venice. This story is kind of a mix between horror and mystery. It's a little bit more mystery than horror, but I felt like, it has ghosts and seances, so it deserves to be listed among the horror movies. This movie is about a detective that is hired in order to investigate a woman who claims to be a spiritual medium. She claims to be getting messages from beyond the grave regarding a rich woman's daughter who died under mysterious circumstances. She claims that the daughter was murdered and that she can figure out who the killer is. This is one of those movies where I feel like you go into it, the less you know, the better. Although I must warn you, this is a slow film, but I feel like the payoff is worth it. It is based on an Agatha Christie story, so this is one of those movies where there's going to be lots of little clues up front that are going to be part of the payoff later on. So it's a slow build, but it's doing things. It's setting things up for later. And you should pay attention even if it is a little bit slow because, it helps. It has a payoff later on in the film. I give A Haunting in Venice 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is The Boogeyman. This was based on a Stephen King short story. I think that they did a pretty good job considering how short the short story is. And the short story is about a guy that goes to see his therapist, and he talks about how there's this evil entity that is so scary and it killed all of his children and it's coming after him. And this is based off of the therapist that is treating that guy. So the movie starts off with him treating that guy. The guy talks about how the monster killed all of his children and it's coming after him. And then he kills himself in the therapist's house. And then suddenly the monster is after the therapist and his kids. I think my favorite part was probably the teenage daughter, her relationship with the younger child, her trying to save her sister. I felt like I could connect with this character quite a bit. So I did enjoy that element to this film. I do think it's a little bit slow, and I don't think that it's very scary, and I don't know if the payoff is going to be worth it for everyone, but I enjoyed it enough to watch it at least once. I don't know if I'll ever watch it again. I don't think it was quite that riveting, but I did feel something for all of the characters, and I thought that the ending was satisfying, and I enjoyed it. I give The Boogeyman 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is Fall of the House of Usher by Mike Flanagan. I'm a huge Mike Flanagan fan. I talk about his work all the time on this channel. I was really looking forward to this because I'm a huge Edgar Allan Poe fan. I love Mike Flanagan's work, so I was like, this is the perfect combination. And it was. It was a really good combination. In terms of ranking this on my list of Mike Flanagan's work, I would say I put it below Hill House and Midnight Mass. I don't think I'm ever going to like anything as much as Midnight Mass. I think that was an amazing piece of work, and that's the kind of thing that most people only make like once in their career. So I'm just trying to be reasonable with my expectations moving forward, because I wasn't as excited by this as I was those other two. But I do think it's better than most of his work. I have trouble comparing it to The Haunting of Bly Manor. I think I need to rewatch that, but it's somewhere along those lines. I liked it a lot more than The Midnight Club, that's for sure. I didn't hate The Midnight Club, but being a huge Christopher Pike fan and seeing the liberties that Mike Flanagan took with The Midnight Club and with some of the stories inside of it, I'm just like, why? Why did you do that, Mike Flanagan? That's my least favorite adaptation by him, by the way. But this was really good. I really liked the overarching story that connects all of the mini stories within this mini series. Each episode is based on a different Edgar Allan Poe story, but obviously it's updated and it's about an entire family. And, each of the family members starts dying one by one in each episode, which is based off of a Poe story. And then, of course, the overarching story is related to Poe's story, The Fall of the House of Usher. Have I lost you? I feel like that was a little bit confusing. So to sum it all up, Fall of the House of Usher was a fantastic adaptation of many of Edgar Allan Poe's works. I thought that it came together really well as a whole, and I think that it is one of Mike Flanagan's best miniseries. I give Fall of the House of Usher 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is the Hulu horror movie, No One Will Save You. This was one of the strangest horror movies that I watched this year. It definitely felt just a little bit surreal, especially when we get to the third act. It reminded me a little bit of Don't Worry Darling, not in terms of plot, but just in terms of the strangeness and surrealness of it, especially the last scene of this movie. It's bizarre, but I really liked it. I think that the story works really well. It's also one of the very few instances I've seen of a movie in modern times that chooses not to have any dialogue in the film, and it actually works really well. So you don't realize until like she starts interacting with people later on, you're like, oh, there's just not going to be any talking in this film. Okay. I'm not usually a huge fan of films that are that daring and that take experimental risks at the cost of, you know, potentially losing character development and other things. Although we do get a glimpse of her mind in some of the letters that she writes, so it's kind of like a little bit of a cheat in that we actually get to see some of her thoughts written down. But yeah, it's unusual. It's a very unusual, surreal film. Basically, it's about a girl that is being chased by aliens for the duration of the film. I do really appreciate the experimentation, unlike some of the other films on this list that have called themselves experimental and were not successful in my opinion. This was a film that was experimental and I feel like it was very successful. I give No One Will Save You 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is Totally Killer. This movie is basically Back to the Future as a fun whodunit slasher film. So the main character's mother is murdered by a serial killer that murdered all of her mom's friends 20 years ago. So her friend, what do you know, just invented time travel. Fun coincidence. And so she goes back in time to try to catch the killer or kill the killer so that she can save her mom's friends and, you know, hopefully save her mom in the present day storyline. I thought this movie was really sweet and heartwarming. I was talking about this movie with a group of friends of mine that are not huge horror watchers. I know, why do I even hang out with those people? But they're good people. They're just not real big horror fans yet. So I was telling them about this movie and they were like, heartwarming and horror? I don't understand. And I was like, no, you don't get it. It's a whole subgenre of horror films, okay? You've got like heartfelt horror, like Mike Flanagan's Haunting of Hill House, you know, horror dramas. But you've also got like heartfelt, feel-good horror films. And I feel like that is exactly what this is. Totally Killer is exciting, it's a fun whodunit, but it definitely has lots of heartfelt moments between the daughter and her mom and them bonding and you wondering if this is one of those films where the mom lives at the end and they all live happily ever after, or if this is one of those films where it's like the main character has to have this journey so that she can reconcile what happened to her mother and her life going forward and how she's going to move on from that. I honestly didn't know until the very end whether or not the mom was going to live. Because I've seen this kind of storyline play out multiple times. The movie Final Girl was very similar to this, except in that movie the main character gets trapped in like her mom's movie from the 80s or something that took place before she was born. So very similar premises. I do think that Totally Killer was a little bit more fun than Final Girls, but I think Final Girls was probably a little bit better overall. I don't know. They're both great films and they're very similar. I think I would just do a double feature and watch them back to back. I give Totally Killer 3 out of 5 stars. Next up is Five Nights at Freddy's. This is a movie that would have greatly benefited from the vibe of Totally Killer, the not taking itself too seriously, having fun, cracking jokes left and right, poking fun at horror tropes and things like that. Five Nights at Freddy's took itself way too seriously. It's about a guy and his sister. He's trying to fight for custody of her and he's taking a job working as security at a closed down animatronics shop because they need security. And you know, the animatronics like take the souls of kids or something. I don't know. It was I was paying attention, but it was terrible. It wasn't even that it was executed, well, the whole thing was executed wrong because the tone was wrong. Like the whole storyline about them taking kids' souls and going into people's minds and trying to give them a choice. Would you save this sibling or this sibling? None of it worked. Like it was trying way too hard to be serious and it was trying to give off like some kind of psychological horror vibes, and that is not what I wanted. I don't think that's what anybody wanted when we saw the trailer. We just wanted some campy, fun horror. I was just like, how do you screw this up? You have Matthew Lillard, who is a scream king, who has been in tons of horror comedies and who always brings comedy to pretty much any role he's in, but especially in horror. I'm like, you have him on board, you have this really fun premise. how do you screw this up? But I know how they screwed it up. They screwed it up by taking it way too seriously. I give Five Nights at Freddy's 2 out of 5 stars. Next up is the only horror film on this list that I did not finish. I stopped about 30 minutes into it because I realized it was not going to get better. And a part of me was like, should I even put this on the list? And I'm like, yes. Yes, it belongs on the list because I watched enough of it. And by God, I want to spare you from having to watch the garbage that I watched. And that movie is Appendage. This movie is about a fashion designer slash seamstress who is trying really hard to do well in her profession, and her teacher is just knocking all of her ideas and kind of being a dick to her. And then her family's being that way, and her friends are being rude to her. And so she has all of these internal emotions that she can't deal with, and it manifests itself physically as an appendage coming off of her body. This is weird, and I was on board for it. I was on board for weird. I loved the trailer. It looked so cool. But like 30 minutes in, the appendage becomes sentient and has like a face and starts talking to her, and I was like, no. There was nothing about this movie that was entertaining to me. The characters were flat. It seemed really predictable. I knew exactly where this was going up until the point where the appendage became sentient and started talking to her. And then I was like, okay, this is worse than where I actually thought this was going. This is terrible. I thought it was going to be about her trying to hide her appendage and her body continuing to morph, and I thought it was going to be a lot of body horror in it. It just got ridiculous, like, really quickly, and not in a fun way. That's another thing, too, is I feel like if this had tonally been a really fun film and they set it up as being silly and campy at the beginning, I might have kept watching a little bit longer. But it was set up as serious. There's nothing in the trailer that suggests that we're gonna have some kind of Muppet action going on, which is what the appendage felt like to me. It felt like a frickin' Muppet talking to her. I could not get on board with it, not even in a it's so bad it's entertaining way. It wasn't fun, it was just bad. I give it 1 out of 5 stars. Next up is The Exorcist Believer. This movie got so much hate, and while I do think that a lot of it is warranted because there are elements of this film that feel like a shameless cash grab. I have this friend of mine who talks about how all films are cash grabs because the point of all films is to make money. But I feel like there's still a difference between a cash grab and like a shameless cash grab, and that's what parts of this felt like, because they brought back Reagan's mom for this, and she comes in at like the halfway mark, and she only stays for a couple scenes, and then something happens to her, and she is pretty much no longer in the film. And that just felt very cheap to me. It kind of reminded me what the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie did with Sally, the heroine who survives the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. They brought her back for this sequel, and you know, that was like what all the hype was about, was, you know, Sally returning and all this stuff. It wasn't the same actress because that actress has sadly passed away, but you know, the character's back. She comes in like a badass and you think she's gonna kick some ass, and then she's like knocked out a couple scenes later. And I'm just really curious, like, what is going on with this whole idea of bringing back these legacy characters but then not doing anything substantial with them. It kind of makes you wonder, what is the point if they're not there to guide the next generation or to guide these new people and, you know, impart their knowledge or somehow impact the plot in some major way? What are they even doing there? Anyway, so I think that's the part that people were mostly upset about. It's the part I was disappointed in, and honestly, I just didn't feel like this was a super successful possession film to begin with. We spend a lot of time with this dad and daughter, and he's a single dad. He seems like a really good guy. The daughter is very sweet and likable. They have a very close relationship, and then this girl and her friend both go missing at the same time. Obviously, he's freaked out. The other girl's parents are freaked out. They kind of start attacking each other verbally a little bit because they're like, well, I didn't even know my daughter was hanging out with your daughter. And he's like, well, maybe you should talk to your daughter more. And like, it was really good tension. Like, this is the part of the film where I started to get invested, is whenever the two girls went missing. And I was thinking to myself the whole time, I'm like, what are these girls doing? And I'm thinking about all these like news reports that I've read about girls going missing in the woods and like, you know, killing other girls, or, you know, like attacking their friends and all this other like really crazy stuff I've heard in the news. So I'm like picturing that. I'm like, what if they're killing dogs? What if they kidnapped a baby? Like, I had all these thoughts in my head about all these terrible things the girls were doing. And then they find the girls, and, you know, I'm expecting them to next go on the mystery of trying to figure out what these girls were doing during that time while they were presumably possessed. and they never find out what they were doing. They just disappeared for 3 days and came back. And, you know, one of the parents speculates, oh, they went to hell. And I'm like, okay, that's not as interesting as the things that I was thinking of. They were in hell, apparently. Apparently that's what they were doing those 3 days. And, you know, the two girls are possessed at the same time by the same demon. And, you know, they keep saying, choose, you have to choose which one of us lives and which one dies. And I won't go into any more other than that, except to say I did like the twist. There was a little bit of a twist at the end. It was not super unsurprising, but I wasn't really paying that much attention at that point because I was starting to get really frustrated with the film. But yeah, this one was a little disappointing for me because I just, even though I went in with low expectations, I still was kind of wanting something a little bit different, and this felt like very familiar to me in a not so good way. I give The Exorcist Believer 3 out of 5 stars. Next up is Thanksgiving. Whenever I saw the trailer for this film, I thought this film is either going to be amazing or terrible, and I'm so glad that it was good. So this movie takes place 1 year after a Black Friday event turns into a wild mob and several people end up dead. The killer is going around murdering people that were there that night, presumably out of some form of revenge. I really liked this film a lot. For some reason it reminded me of the original Scream trilogy, even though it's set in modern times. I cannot explain why, other than the fact that maybe in a way this kind of feels like an instant cult classic or an instant horror classic. I'm not sure what it is. I know that they're both whodunit slasher films, but this is definitely a lot more holiday oriented. And it's also a little bit more out there than the Scream films were. So I'm not 100% sure why, it just gives me those vibes, but it does. I really enjoyed this film. The whodunit element was fun. The deaths were super gory and gross. There's one that like came back to me days after I saw this film when I was cutting into a rotisserie chicken. It reminded me of one of the dinner scenes in this film, and I was like, I honestly was like, I didn't lose my appetite. Like if I had a weaker stomach maybe, if I wasn't as hungry. But for a minute there, I just kind of stopped cutting and I was like, oh. Because it reminded me of something in the film that was very unsettling. So that, you know, it did stick with me. Parts of this film really stuck with me even after I saw it. But mostly it's a fun holiday horror film. I don't think that it's gonna be super shocking to anyone, but it is a really good time. I give Thanksgiving 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is Box Barcelona. So this movie actually came out like much earlier in the year, but I just saw it a few weeks ago. I was literally just kind of browsing and I was like, well, I did like the original Bird Box a lot. I was like, I didn't actually hear anything about this film, like at all, just complete radio silence. And I'm involved in a lot of horror communities, so I was like, that's kind of strange. I was like, well, it must not be very good if nobody's talked about it. So I was like, well, I don't know what else to watch. I'll just kill some time. I'll watch the first 10 minutes and see what happens. And I was blown away by this film, honestly. Granted, I do know my lack of expectations played at least some role in why I enjoyed this film so much. But I do think that even if someone had told me, hey, you should watch this, it's really good, I still think I would have enjoyed it a lot because it does something really different with some tropes that we're very familiar with. And I love it whenever a movie does that. I love whenever a movie assumes that I'm a horror fan, assumes that I've seen a certain trope play out many times, and then like, you know, 15 minutes, 20 minutes into the film is like, hey, guess what? We're doing something else. But it also didn't feel like it was trying too hard to subvert expectations, because later on in the film it kind of does play into some very familiar tropes. So it kind of like subverts expectations and then plays into those expectations, but it works really well. So essentially, if you don't know anything about Bird Box, there are these monsters, possibly, or some kind of evil entity that exists outside, and anytime you go outside without your blindfold on and you look around, you are putting yourself at risk, and you know, the monsters can come and your eyes will glaze over and you'll instantly go and kill yourself. Unless your eyes are covered, then you're protected. Of course, then you're vulnerable from other people that might want to attack you, because sometimes you don't kill yourself, sometimes you go crazy and you'll, you know, try to make other people open their eyes so that they'll kill themselves. It's a very confusing role, but it makes sense in the film. The film does a really good job of kind of explaining the rules and showing everything without telling too much. But anyway, so we start off with this guy and his daughter, and you know, they're just kind of being cute and, you know, being adorable, having this conversation. The dad gets his ass kicked by some blind people, and he encounters a different group of people, and he tells the daughter that he needs to go and find out if these people are good people, and then he leaves the daughter behind. I don't want to say any more about this film except to say that you absolutely need to see this movie if you liked the first Bird Box, because I think that this one is just as good as the first one, and I think it does a good job of expanding the universe and asking new questions while also answering other questions. It does everything a sequel is supposed to do and more. I give Bird Box Barcelona 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is The Last Voyage of the Demeter. So this story is about a doctor who ends up on a merchant ship, and there is a monster in one of the crates. I don't want to say what kind of monster because I don't want to give you any spoilers in case you decide to watch this, but it was fairly predictable. The characters were all kind of flat and boring, and I really wanted to like this film because I love horror stories on ships. I think that it's just such a very interesting combination because it's almost like being in space in terms of how you are so claustrophobic and you're so trapped. And also, like, Ghost Ship is one of my favorite horror movies of all time, so I'm always trying to chase that feeling of what it was like watching Ghost Ship for the first time. Anyways, and I did really like the fact that, you know, one of the main characters is Sir Davos from Game of Thrones, and there's a dragon emblem on one of the crates, so I was like, yay, they're gonna introduce the Khaleesi now! Like, I was really trying to find any way to make this film more interesting. So overall, I don't really know what else to say about it. It's slow. The payoff isn't worth it. Not super fond of the characters. It's a shame. I really wanted to like this film. I don't think it's a terrible film by any means. It just wasn't for me, and I think that I understand why this film didn't have a whole lot of hype behind it and why I don't hear anybody talking about it. It's just a very okay film. So I give The Last Voyage of the Demeter 2.5 out of 5 stars. And now for the last horror film of the year, the last horror film that I watched this year. That is It's a Wonderful Knife. This movie is about a girl named Winnie who saves her town from a serial killer the year before, but now this year, nobody appreciates her or what she did for the town. Her boyfriend's cheating on her, her friends are covering for him, or they're just ignoring her and being rude. Her parents decide to buy her brother a truck, but they buy her a tracksuit for Christmas as if that's fair. She's being bullied by the serial killer's brother who's still around apparently, and he's threatening to kill her. You know, no one's looking out for her, everyone's being mean to her or dismissing her, and she wishes that she had never existed. Well, we all know what happens whenever you make a wish like that in a movie. Bam! Wish granted. She enters a parallel world where she never existed, and as a result, the serial killer is still at large, going around murdering everyone in the town. Her brother's already dead, her dad is a shell of a man, he's nothing like the father that she knew, her mom is an alcoholic who's sleeping with everybody in town as a way of dealing with her grief. Things are not good. So she teams up with the town outcast, whose nickname is Weirdo, because the people of this town are not super imaginative, apparently. And, you know, they work together to try to figure out how to send her back to her world where her parents are normal and her brother is still alive. So this film sounds like really awesome, and it was pretty good. Like, I enjoyed it, but I was expecting it to be just a little bit funnier, or like the kills to be just a little bit better. Like, it was okay. Also, I really wish Justin Long had had a few more scenes, or if he'd at least been allowed to shine more in the scenes that he was in. You know, I wish the script had really made use of his really good comedic timing, because I think he is a hilarious actor whenever he's given the right material. And he's not the only one. There's a few other actors in this movie that I've seen play comedy roles that I just didn't feel like were given a lot to work with in this film. So I thought the premise was great. I thought the acting was pretty good. I think the screenplay could have used a couple more revisions just to make it a little bit funnier. But overall, I think that it was a pretty okay film. I give It's a Wonderful Knife 3 out of 5 stars. So that is it. That is all the horror films that were released in 2023 that I saw this year. I think I saw most of them, honestly. At the end of last year, I had this whole list of movies I had to catch up on, and this year I feel like I've seen pretty much everything. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe I missed a few. If there is a horror movie that you would like to recommend that I missed this year, please leave a comment in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and be sure to subscribe. On this channel, I post reviews, writing advice, horror commentary, and vlogs. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you later.